Welcome to ENside Politics, our weekly podcast on everything you more or less need to know about San Antonio politics. My name is Greg Jefferson. I'm politics editor of the San Antonio Express News, and I'm joined today by City Hall reporter Molly Smith.
Hello.
And General Assignment reporter Rima Castillo. And our special guest today is UTSA professor of criminology, Michael Smith.
Good morning.
Great. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for braving the cold to be here, though you just live in Southtown, so it's not that big a deal. So we brought you on to talk about ICE and Border Patrol and their interactions with the San Antonio Police Department, because I think it's fair to say most Americans have been watching what's happening in Minnesota horrified by the killing of Renee Good on January 7th, and now by the killing of Alex Preddy by Border Patrol agents Saturday morning. And I don't think it's crazy to say that a lot of people who are watching these events unfold think that ICE may be out of control and may be poorly trained to do what they're doing now. And a lot of those observers are now questioning what ICE and Border Patrol's interactions are with their local police departments. And I think you've seen that certainly at San Antonio City Council last week. There was a pretty convulsive meeting on Thursday that we'll get into in a bit. But I wanted to start off, Professor Smith, by asking you, how has the mission of ICE and Border Patrol, what was it 13 months ago, and how has it changed, and how do they operate differently under President Donald Trump?
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me on, Greg.
Sure.
And I just want to say, for the benefit of the audience, that while I am a professor of criminology at UTSA and a police scholar, I'm not here in representing UTSA this morning.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
To your question about, what is the role of ERO? That's ICE's Enforcement and Removal Operations division today versus what it was. I think that the mission remains the same. Mm-hmm. Clearly the deployment and the tactics that are being used are quite different.
Right. And how have those changed? Like, what were you seeing under the the Biden administration that you're certainly not seeing now?
Well, ERO has always operated throughout the country. That's their mission, to identify and remove individuals who are not here legally or in compliance with various immigration statutes. Mm-hmm. They typically don't do that in force. In large numbers and publicly,
right?
And so that's, I think, the difference that you're seeing. That's playing out in real time in very disturbing ways in Minneapolis, and other places, but particularly in Minneapolis.
Right. Now, how does the training of ICE and Border Patrol agents, how does it differ from San Antonio police officers and other metro police departments?
Right. So ERO or ICE, the ERO division of ICE, and there's, ICE is made up of two essentially central divisions, right? ERO and Homeland Security Investigations. ERO is the component of ICE that's charged with, removal operations. They have their own academy at Glencoe, Georgia, at FLETC in Georgia, and it's a 13-week academy, and I think there's a Spanish language component as well. That's a few more weeks, and that's the training. That's the length of the training. The specifics I'm not super familiar with.
So do you know whether they do, what SAPD would consider pretty standard policing techniques, de-escalation, maybe crowd dispersal?
Right.
So are they trained in that at all?
Yeah, so I think their training in dealing with crowds, especially hostile crowds, is pretty minimal. And I think that you're seeing, visceral evidence of that every day on the streets of Minneapolis. I think that's one of the challenges, one of the problems right now with the way they're being used and deployed, is they don't appear to be particularly well trained, certainly not well supervised in the operations that they're undertaking. Now, with respect to the local police agency like the SAPD, the SAPD in particular is a large, well-trained organization. Their academy is 8 months in duration. It's highly professional. There's crowd control component to that academy training, along with a lot of other things. There's extensive training on the use of force, deployment of less lethal weapons and lethal weapons for that matter. So the training that the SAPD gets is, I would say, very good from sort of modern professional law enforcement training standards.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of inside knowledge on, the particulars of ERO's academy. It's less than half the length. I know that. And I, we're all witnessing sort of what's happening on the streets in Minneapolis and other places, which raises the question about training and I think also supervision, and also reporting, as well in terms of how they're reporting out publicly and the uses of force that are.
Can we narrow that down? I mean, we've all seen, several videos of the Preddy shooting, and I'm sure you've seen them. What did you take away from them? What was Border Patrol doing wrong, and what were they doing right, if anything?
Well, I think what I saw in that particular incident and any number of other ones that I've seen on various video clips is a relatively indiscriminate use of force. Lots of examples of force being used against people who appear to be protesting peacefully, who are just standing there on the corner or on the sidewalk, and an ICE agent comes up and shoves the person who may be filming them and all of that. There's certainly that's happening, but that's also, unless those individuals, and many of them don't appear to be actively impeding the operations, they're there, present on the scene, of course. But ICE seems to be taking great umbrage at that and just indiscriminately using force against people. Lots of examples of pepper spray being used in the same way. Examples of pepper spray being used with individuals who are clearly restrained. None of these are professional or acceptable or constitutional uses of force, the kinds of examples that I just gave.
No, and I feel like we're definitely seeing how that is having a very devastating, chilling effect on people who would like to speak up about, immigration enforcement operations all over the country. And I do have sort of a little spate of questions for you. So immigration enforcement operations are not a new thing. We've been seeing them carried out under both the Obama administration and the Biden administration, and especially here in Texas, which has a very large population of Latino migrants. And, while the Obama and the Biden administration had received a lot of pushback from critics for the way they carried out enforcement operations, I don't think we haven't seen this level of pushback from people until now. With the Trump administration, people really taking to the streets and protesting. And I want to sort of gauge, as I understand, the Trump administration has cut multiple watchdog agencies overseeing, federal immigration enforcement agencies. So my question for you is, how are we seeing that play out on a national level and more localized at the San Antonio level? From the dismissal of these sort of watchdog committees and these safeguards, how can we sort of gauge how the attitude and the mission towards immigration has changed from the Obama administration and the Biden administration to the one we're currently under?
Well, as you said, ERO has been around since the post 9/11 era, right? It's been around for a long time, and they've engaged in removal operations that entire time, including, as you pointed out, under Obama and Biden, significantly under Obama, in fact. And the Obama administration came, as you pointed out, came under a lot of criticism by certain sectors of the country because of their, at the time, relatively aggressive push to remove individuals who were allegedly here illegally. So it's not a new thing. What's new is the way the level of aggressiveness that we're seeing and the public deployment of these officers in large numbers. And that I think, and that's, in my mind anyway, the difference between people who are unhappy or speaking out about operations that occurred under previous administrations versus today is that the aggressiveness and the violence and the scale of this is just on a totally different level than in previous administrations. In terms of the role of inspector generals and things like that, I don't know. I think that has on terms of the day-to-day deployment and supervision of these groups of officers, that has very little to do with it. What has everything to do with it is the active, is the leadership that's occurring or not occurring on a day-to-day basis on the street within these teams of officers, and the relative impunity with which they're apparently being allowed to operate.
Now, I want to read a social media post. It went up not long after the Preddy shooting on Saturday. It's Los Angeles. Federal prosecutor, I just want to get your assessment of it. He says, if you approach law enforcement with a gun, and there is a high likelihood that they will be legally justified in shooting you. Now we know that Preddy was carrying a weapon. He had the legal right to do so. It was not drawn. And it appears that it was actually removed from him just moments before he was shot. But I wanted to get your take on that argument, that if you walk up to Border Patrol with a gun in your holster, you could be shot.
Yeah, that's a nonsensical statement. Mm-hmm. And in Texas in particular, many people are armed, legally armed, and they interact with law enforcement officers every day, mm-hmm. and they don't get shot. Right. Yeah. There are clear constitutional and legal guidelines and internal policy guidelines that professional law enforcement agencies anyway follow and should follow, none of which permit shooting someone because they walk up to you with a gun in a holster. Right.
Now, as we'd mentioned earlier, there's a lot of attention now being paid to how ICE and Border Patrol agents kind of deal with and interact with local police departments. In Texas, there are a couple of ways of doing it. One is under Texas Senate Bill 4. And then across the country, everybody is this is national federal law, the 287G agreements. Let's go through. I'd like you to kind of take us through both separately. So let's start with Senate Bill 4. It was enacted in 2017. What was the background? Like what brought this law about and what does it do?
I think the concern, as I recall at the time, was around this notion of sanctuary cities and, mm-hmm. Texas being a conservative state and not wanting to permit its major municipalities to be quote unquote sanctuary cities, right? Places.
By the way, what do you take a sanctuary city to be? Do you have your own definition of it?
Well,
it seems pretty loose.
Yeah, the word the examples that I guess I can think of or that come to mind are cities that if they take an individual into custody who has an administrative detainer outstanding on that individual's, won't notify, for example, ICE that they have this individual in custody. Mm-hmm. And that individual may bond out or get released, and ICE would never know about it, right? Mm-hmm. So I think my sort of recollection of the genesis of the particular Senate bill that you're talking about was to avoid that or prevent that from happening.
Yeah. Now, what does the bill do?
Well, it requires local law enforcement agencies to check the immigration status of individuals that they take into custody, and to notify ICE if those individuals are wanted. If they have an administrative detainer on them or if they have a warrant on file, for that matter, which are different. Those are different things, right? So it prevents them from doing the thing that sanctuary cities typically do, which is to not notify ICE if they come in contact with an individual who they know has an administrative detainer on them.
Right.
Many people came to City Council last week and expressed frustration with SAPD's kind of cooperation with ICE or other federal agencies when requested, usually to provide, it seems like, perimeter support or traffic enforcement. And I wanted to kind of get your perspective on when let's say a federal agency requests SAPD assistance, is there anything the department can do to limit that under the law and be in compliance?
Yeah. So the Senate bill we're talking about doesn't say anything about that, right? It doesn't say, it doesn't address, requests for assistance for, general sort of law enforcement purposes, traffic control, crowd control, things like that. That's not what the Senate bill that we're talking about in Texas is designed to do. Now, in terms of how the SAPD responds to those requests, that would it's a policy question, really, probably better addressed by Chief McManus or someone from the city. I can just speak to it in a general way. Law enforcement agencies typically cooperate with one another, and that's on the state level, on the local level, between local and federal. That relationship is typically amicable, and local agencies, in my experience, will want to support their federal partners when those kind of requests occur. But because of the extreme nature of what we're seeing play out on the streets with ICE and ERO and Border Patrol and other federal agencies, I think in some cities there's a reluctance to do that now. And there are some community members, maybe more than some, who don't want their local police to support ICE's behavior on the streets in Minneapolis, for example.
Yeah. We had,
excuse me.
We had, like I'd said earlier, we had a fairly explosive city council meeting last Thursday. It was supposed to be city council getting a briefing on what SAPD's dealings with ICE and Border Patrol were like, what was transpiring between those several agencies. And what happened was about 180, I think it was about 180 residents signed up to speak. Most of them did address city council. I think the overwhelming majority of them were really concerned about ICE's involvement with SAPD and I think a lot of them didn't want any involvement. Where did city council come down? Because after 5 hours of public discussion, people kind of weighing in, it landed in city council's lap. And what happened?
I would say a majority on council, I think, recognized that SAPD's hands are somewhat tied under the law, and that, as Police Chief McManus will say it, if they're requested to cooperate in any capacity, they have to comply if they have the personnel. And that while SAPD is not doing the immigration enforcement. They are assisting in kind of more minor ways. So I think most council members recognize that the department, at least under state law, can't do much. There were a few council members who said it should just end completely, and if that means we get sued, we get sued.
So in violation of state law.
Yeah.
So just kind of flout.
And that was Jalen McKee-Rodriguez, Terry Castillo, and Edward Munguia. So kind of more liberal council members. But I think overall, council is kind of looking to find ways to limit it, or at least be more kind of publicly transparent about it. I know that we have never really gotten a clear understanding of how often these requests are made. Police Chief McManus said that in 2025 there were only 2 requests to work with ICE, which he said is rare. And I did want to get your perspective on, are these kind of historically more rare requests?
Yeah, and Chief McManus would know the data better on those requests than I would. But these kinds of requests are typically ad hoc, and they involve specific, typically arrest operations, or maybe a joint task force operation where there's a joint task force between federal and local law enforcement officers who work a long-term investigation, and maybe there's going to be a large number of arrests that are going to occur on a particular day. And the local police will need to be there for perimeter security, for crowd control, for traffic control, and that sort of thing. Outside of the sort of normal day-to-day operations of these sort of joint task forces. So the kind of larger scale public operations that you're seeing ICE perform in Minneapolis is not normative. And it does, particularly in Minneapolis, as we've seen now, draw crowds every time. And then the local law enforcement agency is in a difficult position at that point, when you may have members of the local government or constituencies in the local jurisdiction that don't want them to assist. Right. There's, again, historically, these relationships have been amicable, and local law enforcement agencies want to, for a variety of good reasons, support federal law enforcement, and vice versa, I should say. And so this is really putting these sort of operations that ICE is undertaking, and the large scale protests that you're seeing in other cities, Minneapolis in particular, really putting a strain on that historic relationship between local law enforcement and the feds.
Some council members raise this idea of having a local reporting system where if someone feels like ICE or another federal agency has violated their constitutional rights, they could report locally. And I know that the Office of Inspector General is the one that would actually do the investigations, but there was this idea of locally we need to know how many folks allegedly have had their rights violated. I'm curious what you see as kind of the purpose of that, and if that data if there'd be any kind of purpose of having this data collection, because SAPD, if you call and say a Border Patrol agent or an ICE agent violated my constitutional rights, is not going to investigate that. They're just going to direct you to a federal agency.
Yeah, it's very different from a DOJ investigation, Department of Justice.
Right. And
is
I
there
don't think anyone has a lot of confidence in that.
Well, yeah, I think that's why it's coming up locally.
Right. And I'm reading public accounts, news accounts, and I'm sure you all are too, of local residents in Minneapolis doing that very thing, calling the Minneapolis Police Department with complaints about mistreatment and excessive force and the like. So it's an interesting turnaround, right? From historically the role of the federal government, like in the civil rights era, oftentimes was reversed. It was the federal government that was protecting the rights of citizens against perceived overreach by state and local authorities. And that has literally been flipped upside down.
Yeah. Now, Rima, you've done reporting on several raids in which SAPD has been involved. Walk us through a couple of them and what the police department, what their job was at those scenes.
Yeah, so I covered the mass ICE raid back in late 2025, in which approximately 150 migrants were detained, and about 27 to 30 of them were allegedly involved with operations from Tren de Aragua. And the operation was a conglomeration of several federal and local law enforcement agencies coming together to arrest and detain and charge the migrants who were involved. And the San Antonio Police Department was a supporting agency in that. And, there were several critics who came forward saying that this, operation required more oversight because of the 150 migrants who were detained. They were all labeled as illegal migrants by the locally based federal immigration authorities. And Joaquin Castro came forward with a Facebook post saying, hey, we need more oversight from, federal agencies on these operations to understand what the fate of the remainder of these migrants is. Are they being, detained in local or state-based detention facilities? Are they being deported out of the country? It wasn't SAPD who provided the direct answers on that. It was the locally based federal immigration.
Did any San Antonio police have hands on these alleged Tren de Agua, which is the Venezuelan gang members, or was their job something else? Like, what does it mean, I guess, to support ICE in a raid like that? What did they do?
Documentation, sort of spreading awareness about what the enforcement operation was for. As I understand, it was primarily the FBI and ICE who was on the ground conducting the raid. And the San Antonio Police Department was involved in disseminating the information from federal authorities to the public.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it was the FBI executed a narcotics search warrant on what they called a after-hours club was kind of the goal of it. So SAPD was called in to provide kind of perimeter enforcement, which could you explain kind of what that is? That's like the term that SAPD uses is we're doing, I guess, what do they say? Perimeter enforcement and traffic enforcement. So they did block, I think, some lanes off of San Pedro. And this was pretty early and late at night, early in the morning. So not a lot kind of going on, but...
So there's a number of things, to sort of unpack here. So there are ongoing joint local, a variety of task forces, investigatory task forces that are standing and have been long-standing and operate in America's cities every day. Partnerships between a variety of federal law enforcement agencies, FBI, DEA, ATF, local law enforcement, sometimes state troopers, are part of these task forces. And these task forces investigate gang activity, they investigate drug activity and the intersection between the two of those things on a regular basis. And they make cases and they execute search warrants and they make arrests within the sort of ecosphere of the task force, So that's not anything unusual. It's been going on for a long time. These things can be very effective at dealing with organized crime, like the Venezuelan gang that you mentioned. So that's sort of, normal activity, if you will. ICE showing up with 100 officers and in a large scale operation on a regular basis on the streets of Minneapolis or San Antonio, for that matter, is not a normal thing. So that's sort of one point to make. In terms of what would the SAPD's role be? Well, if it's one of these joint task force operations, and now this is the day when the search warrants are going to be executed and people are going to be arrested, then the members of that task force would do what cops do. They would be part of that operation. They would be involved in the execution of the search warrant and the physically arresting individuals. The patrol response from the local police would be to secure the perimeter, to make sure that there aren't a lot of passers-by or vehicles entering into the scene where people could get, mistaken for individuals who they weren't, or get it or impede, not necessarily on purpose, but impede the operation. So they will control the perimeter. They'll block off streets. They'll stop pedestrians from entering that section of the apartment complex where the warrant is being executed, for example, or things like that. And that's just the normal cooperative response that typically goes on between local and federal law enforcement.
Now, in Minneapolis, we've seen protesters who are highly organized. They learn pretty quickly when ICE is in a neighborhood, and quite often you'll have, several protesters with whistles showing up. They've got their camera phones out. Rima, are we seeing anything like that in the city of San Antonio? I know you did a really good story a couple of weeks ago when there was a rumor going around social media circles that ICE was going door to door on the West Side. So what are you seeing?
Yeah, so we haven't been seeing on the ground protesters sort of, acting as a watchdog entity towards ICE officials. But on social media, we have been seeing several unconfirmed reports, and these come in almost on a daily basis, of people saying that they have spotted ICE agents going door to door on the streets, conducting checkpoints. And these sort of updates, they're shared through Instagram, Facebook. A lot of them are unconfirmed.
Yeah. Have you seen any evidence that ICE is actually going door to door?
We have. From what I've seen, it seems like they are carrying out very targeted operations against specific individuals here within the city and the surrounding areas. It seems like they're not actually going door to door, knocking on people's doors, asking for their, their documentation. But that is a very real fear that has been circulating around San Antonio, seeing as the migrant population here is very high. And a lot of people are worried that a situation like Minneapolis could sort of ramp up here in San Antonio, which, I'm unsure of the likelihood of that. Seeing as Governor Greg Abbott is, already has a very magnified lens over the immigration situation here in Texas.
It's not happening.
Yeah. So, that kind of public response here in San Antonio, we are very passionate about, keeping the safety of the community top of mind. There are protests here that go on weekly, organized by several different political organizations. But, I think at the city council meeting that you talked about, a lot of people were discussing how we can act proactively to prevent something like that from happening and escalating in San Antonio.
Now, in Minnesota, the Trump administration, as we know, has blamed Minnesota's mayor and Tim Walz, the governor, of inciting kind of what he's sometimes characterized as the domestic terrorists. He's also blamed local law enforcement for not assisting ICE and Border Patrol. And given that that's not part of their training, that kind of policing, having to deal with protesters in their face, does the president have a point?
Yeah, that's a good question. In ordinary times, you would expect that level of cooperation between two, a federal law enforcement agency and its local partner. Mm-hmm. These are not normal times. Right. And the way that ICE is behaving on the streets in America is not normal. And so you have local law enforcement agencies being placed in a very difficult position where they would normally and willingly assist their federal partners. Mm-hmm. And yet, I think on the part of some of them, they don't want to be participants in the violence and the mayhem that those federal law enforcement agencies are bringing with them, right, in unprecedented ways.
Yeah. Now, so we've talked about SB 4. Let's move on to 287G agreements. Mm-hmm. What are these?
It's a federal statute that allows ICE to, in effect, deputize federal or local law enforcement officers to assist them in immigration enforcement capacities. And mm-hmm. there's several different ways in which 287G agreements can take place. Mm-hmm. But that's essentially what they are. And it requires an agreement between the agency and ICE. Right. And then the designation of some number of officers within the agreeing agency to receive some special immigration training, mm-hmm. And essentially be deputized is the best way to put it.
What does deputized mean when it comes to immigration control? Is it ICE and Border Patrol saying, okay, you know what the law is, you've gotten some degree of training, go do what we do? Or is it more directed?
It's more directed than that. Okay. But at the end of the day, that's what it is, though. It's the local law enforcement agencies or sheriff's departments and jails, for example, who are executing federal detention warrant orders and things like that. Yeah. Or are checking in the immigration status of individuals on the street and then detaining them as an ICE office, as an ERO officer would do, mm-hmm. if they can't produce documentation indicating that they're here legally.
Right.
And SAPD does not have one of these agreements, but Balcones Heights, for example, does. Does the sheriff's department?
Precinct 3.
Precinct 3 does. So kind of it's not kind of, I think, every agency. I am curious kind of why would a city like Balcones Heights, like what is kind of the rationale for cities to enter into these?
You would have to ask the mayor of Balcones Heights. I can't speak for them. So
San Antonio Police Department, like I just don't think that I'm not sure how old the 287G program is.
It's been around since after 9/11.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that there was ever a city council, San Antonio City Council in that time that politically would have been okay with SAPD signing this agreement. So politically, we can understand why SAPD isn't a signatory to this.
And I should note, just on that point, I checked you can go on the ICE website and you can see the list of agencies that have agreed by state. Yeah. I happened to look at Texas's this morning, in fact, and none of the major cities in Texas have signed 287G agreements.
Yeah, which kind of gets to my question. Like, are there good law enforcement reasons, not political reasons, but good law enforcement reasons for not signing these agreements?
Yeah, and you've seen some of this play out publicly in Dallas, for example, in reported stories of Dallas Police Department being contacted by ICE and wanting them to participate in a 287G agreement, and DPD saying no, and this, the reasons given I think are valid. The police department, the Dallas Police Department, the San Antonio Police Department, Houston Police Department they have their hands full dealing with local crime and responding to the overwhelming number of calls from their own community and their own citizens and the myriad things that they do every day. Taking some number of officers out of that responsibility and essentially devoting them to federal immigration enforcement dilutes their ability to do the job that they're actually there to do. And so there are legitimate non-political reasons around personnel and manpower needs that I think would mitigate against a big city entering into an agreement like that.
Right. Now, we should also note that the Bexar County Sheriff's Office, because the state legislature last year passed a law saying they do have to, if a sheriff oversees jail operations, they have to enter into these agreements with federal immigration authorities. So the Sheriff's Office does have an agreement. I think they have, there are 3 different models, as I think you mentioned. They've got to pick one by the end of 2026. So they have signed on, but it doesn't sound like it's anything that Javier Salazar would have done on his own. I'm probably not.
Yes, no.
Yeah, probably guessing not. Now, we should note that you have worked with SAPD and are currently conducting some work. Describe that for us. What are you doing?
Yeah, so I lead a team of researchers at UTSA and other universities, and we partner with cities around the country, including ours here in San Antonio, on evidence-based crime reduction strategies. So we designed a violent crime reduction strategy initially for Dallas and now for San Antonio, and we've been partnering with the city for 3 years now in the implementation of that set of strategies and then evaluation of its results. And so we do that on an ongoing basis and are still engaged in that work.
Okay. Now, as you know, Sheriff, no, he would not be thrilled with this. Police Chief William McManus has announced his retirement, which means there's going to be a search on for a new police chief. And you can generalize here, but I'm curious about what it is that big city managers and mayors, what do they typically look for in their next police chief, and how might what's happening with the immigration crackdown, with ICE, with Border Patrol shape San Antonio's search for a new police chief?
Yeah, I mean, okay, thanks for the question. What do they generally look for? I think, we're the 7th largest city in the country. Right. Being a police chief is a 24/7 job in a city like ours. And it takes someone with a great deal of experience and professionalism and good judgment, and it also takes someone who can get along with the leadership, right? With the city manager and the assistant city manager for public safety and the council members. And I mean, there's a political dimension to every big city police chief's job, right? So it does require sort of a politically savvy actor to be able to navigate that political terrain that he or she has to respond to. So that's always a consideration. How might it affect the search for a new chief? I'm not sure what's happening. I don't know. I can't speak for what Eric Walsh or the city council might be looking for in their next chief with respect to interactions with ICE, for example, or relationships with that component of the Trump administration. I don't know. But I think it does add another dimension of challenge to the job that is new, that hasn't been there until recently.
How is that, do you think, even changing maybe career law enforcement officers who'd maybe be looking at jobs like this? Does that kind of factor in who we might see apply? Or are these kind of just challenges that come with this field? It's kind of cyclical challenges of your job gets harder given what's going on? Or
Yeah.
do you think we're going to see a different set of applicants or fewer people apply?
I don't think you'll see a different set of applicants. You may see individuals deciding to retire instead of when they leave the agency they've done a career with, instead of throwing their hat in the ring for the next police chief's job. You know, that you may see more of. The job is harder and it's more complex, and this makes it even more so.
Now, we obviously have no idea yet how the situation is going to play out in Minnesota. And we'll make this our last question. Is what we're seeing have seen in Chicago, Portland, Los Angeles, and now Minneapolis, is that possible in any major city in Texas, or are the politics of the state, the very conservative politics, just because of that, it's just not going to happen here?
I think it's unlikely. I mean, this is my personal opinion. I think it's unlikely for the reasons you said, right? And there's a reason why you haven't seen the kinds of operations in Texas or anywhere in the South, for that matter, that you've seen in traditionally blue states like California and Oregon and Minnesota. You know, that's not by accident.
Right.
That those things haven't occurred down here in Texas.
Great. Mike Smith, thank you very much. We appreciate you joining us. Thank you for joining us. We will be back next week. Once again, if you have not signed up for the ENside Politics newsletter, I'm shocked and appalled, but drop to show notes, click on the thing, sign up, and we will see you next week. Thank you very much.